Before dawn on Friday, October 13th, 1307, soldiers fanned out across France. The orders had been sealed, kept secret for weeks, and delivered to royal officers in every corner of the kingdom simultaneously. Their target? The Knights Templar, warrior monks who had spent nearly 2 centuries accumulating land, castles, financial influence, stretching from England to the edges of the known world. In a single coordinated sweep ordered by King Philip IV, hundreds of Templars were dragged from their beds and thrown into royal custody. What the king's men found next is what makes this story so strange. When investigators opened the Templar vaults, expecting to seize one of the greatest fortunes in medieval Europe, the records that survive suggest they found far less than anyone anticipated. The treasury, according to accounts from that period, appeared largely empty. The fleet the Templars were known to maintain on France's Atlantic coast, gone. The wealth of an organization that had served as banker to kings and popes for generations had seemingly overnight vanished. One of the richest and most powerful organizations in medieval history disappeared in a single night. So where did the money go? 7 centuries later, that question remains genuinely unanswered. In this episode, we are going to trace exactly how the Templars built their financial empire, the verified history, the documented facts, then examine the theories, the legends, and the speculation surrounding what happened to it all. To understand where the fortune went, we first need to understand the extraordinary scale of what was built. That story begins not in a counting house, but on a dusty road to Jerusalem. In the aftermath of the First Crusade, Christian pilgrims began making the long and perilous journey to the Holy Land in significant numbers. The roads were lawless. Bandits preyed on travelers. People who had sold everything they owned to make the journey were robbed, killed, or simply disappeared. The Holy City had been taken, but reaching it was still a death sentence for the unprepared. Around 1119, and historians note the exact year is still debated, a small group of French knights made a vow to dedicate themselves to protecting these pilgrims. They established themselves near the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, and from that location they took their name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The world would come to know them simply as the Knights Templar. For the first decade, the order was modest, underfunded, and operating largely on the strength of its own conviction. That changed in 1129 when the Catholic Church formally recognized the Templars at the Council of Troyes. With that recognition came legitimacy, and with legitimacy came something far more powerful: donations. Nobles across Europe, eager to support the crusading cause without necessarily traveling themselves, began gifting the Templars with land, castles, estates, and money. Properties accumulated across France, England, the Iberian Peninsula, and Italy. The order that had begun with a handful of knights guarding a road now held assets spread across an entire continent. This is documented history. Surviving charters and church records confirm the scale of the order's land acquisitions over the following decades. Then, in 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a papal bull known as Omne Datum Optimum. This was not a minor administrative document. It granted the Templars a set of privileges that were, for the medieval world, almost without precedent. They were exempted from local taxes. They answered to no bishop, no king, no local lord, only to the Pope himself. They could build their own churches and keep their own chaplains. In a world built on feudal obligation and ecclesiastical hierarchy, the Templars existed almost entirely outside both. The result was an organization with growing wealth, vast landholdings, and institutional independence that no other body in medieval Europe quite matched. But there was still one urgent, practical problem that pilgrims faced every single day. They needed to carry their wealth to the Holy Land without being robbed along the way. The solution that Templars invented for that problem was so effective that kings and popes started using it too, and that is where the real power began. Think about what it meant to travel from Paris to Jerusalem in the 12th century. The roads were dangerous. Bandits operated openly. Crossing from one kingdom into another meant passing through territories where your money, your goods, and your life were all at risk. and yet thousands of pilgrims made that journey every year, many of them carrying significant wealth to fund their stay in the Holy Land. The question was simple and urgent. How do you move money across a continent when the continent is trying to rob you? The Templars had an answer, and it was elegant. A pilgrim arriving at a Templar commandery in France, one of the order's local houses, could deposit their valuables there before setting out. In return, they received a document. The precise details of how these documents were encoded or authenticated are not fully preserved in the historical record, but the principle is clear. Document could be presented at another Templar house further along the route or at a Templar facility in the Crusader states. The bearer could withdraw an equivalent sum. The gold stayed behind. The document traveled. The pilgrim arrived in Jerusalem without ever having carried a fortune through the wilderness. Historians are careful to note that this was not banking in the modern sense. The Templars were not operating savings accounts or charging interest the way a contemporary bank would, but as an early and sophisticated precursor to the financial instruments we take for granted today. The letter of credit, the managed account, the cross-border transfer, what the Templars built was genuinely remarkable for its time, and once the system existed, it was too useful to stay limited to pilgrims. Merchants quickly recognized what the Templars had created. Moving trade goods across Europe carried the same risks as any other journey, and the Templar network offered a solution. Then came the monarchs. Historical records document that both King Louis VII of France and King Henry II of England made use of Templar financial services. These were not small arrangements. Kings required the management of significant funds across multiple territories, and the Templars had the infrastructure to handle it. The order also extended loans. Crusading was expensive. Equipping an army, financing a sea voyage, maintaining a castle in hostile territory, all of it demanded capital that many nobles, even monarchs, simply did not have on hand. Surviving records indicate the Templars lent money and sometimes held collateral in return. Land titles, crown jewels, pledges of future revenue. The details of individual arrangements varied, and we should be careful not to project modern financial logic too precisely onto medieval practice, but the broad shape is clear. Nowhere was this more visible than in Paris. The Templar headquarters in the French capital, known as the Paris Temple, functioned at various points, something resembling a treasury for the French crown itself, involved in managing royal accounts and, at times, the collection of royal taxes. The exact scope of that role shifted over the decades, but its existence tells you everything about how deeply the Templars had embedded themselves into the machinery of medieval power. Stretch that network outward, commanderies from Portugal and England in the west to the Crusader states in the east. What you have is an interconnected financial infrastructure spanning a continent. It worked in large part because people trusted it. The Templars had taken vows of poverty. Individual members were not supposed to profit personally. That structural fact reduced the incentive for fraud and gave the order a reputation for reliability that no individual merchant or moneylender could easily match. They had made themselves indispensable, and as history has shown more than once, indispensability to kings is a very dangerous position to occupy. The same wealth that gave the Templars their power was already drawing the attention of someone who would use it against them. By the early 14th century, the Knights Templar had spent nearly 200 years accumulating wealth, influence, institutional power on a scale that few organizations in medieval Europe could match. But power of that kind has a way of attracting enemies, and by 1307, the Templars had acquired one of the most dangerous enemies imaginable. The King of France himself, King Philip IV, known to history as Philip the Fair, had fought a series of expensive wars, left the French crown in serious financial difficulty. Historical records document that Philip was deeply indebted to the Templars among other creditors. For a monarch whose authority rested on projecting strength and control, owing money to a military order that answered not to him, to the Pope, was an uncomfortable arrangement, and one he had reason to want resolved. His opportunity came from a shift in the wider world. In 1291, the city of Acre fell to Mamluk forces, ending the last significant Christian foothold in the Holy Land. For the Templars, this was not simply a military defeat, it was an existential crisis. Their founding purpose had been to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. With the Crusader states gone, that justification had collapsed. Critics began asking openly what exactly the Templars were still for. The order was wealthy, powerful, and politically connected, but its original mission had vanished along with the Crusader presence in the East. Philip moved in 1307. The charges leveled against the Templars were extraordinary. Members of the order were accused of heresy, of denying Christ during their initiation ceremonies, and of worshiping an idol referred to as Baphomet. Other accusations of a degrading and blasphemous nature were added to the list. It is essential to state this clearly. These accusations were extracted under torture. They were disputed at the time by many of the accused, and most modern historians regard them as politically motivated rather than evidence of genuine crimes. The charges have never been independently verified, and the scholarly consensus today treats them with considerable skepticism, though historians continue to debate the details. Pope Clement V, already in a weakened political position relative to the French crown, yielded to Philip's pressure. He issued orders for the arrest of Templars across Christendom and, at the Council of Vienne in 1312, formally dissolved the order. 2 years later, in 1314, Grand Master Jacques de Molay, the last leader of the Knights Templar, was burned at the stake in Paris. That much is documented historical fact, and then came the inventory. When royal officers moved through the Templar properties and catalogued what they found, the results were, according to surviving accounts, subsequent scholarly interpretation, deeply puzzling, the wealth that should have been there, the accumulated reserves of an organization that had managed royal accounts and held the assets of kings, was largely absent. The vaults were not full. The Templar fleet, reportedly based at the Atlantic port of La Rochelle, was gone. No official record ever fully accounted for the missing wealth. So where did it go? The theories, some grounded in evidence, some purely speculative, and some belonging to legend outright, are where this story gets truly strange. Before we go any further, it is important to be honest about what we are doing in this chapter. Some of what follows is grounded in real historical evidence, some of it is informed speculation, and some of it is legend, pure and simple. We will tell you which is which, because on a question this old, with evidence this thin, that distinction matters enormously. Theory 1, and it has at least a foothold in the historical record. The Templars are known to have maintained a fleet of ships based at La Rochelle on France's Atlantic coast. What happened to those ships after the arrests of October 13th, 1307, is not clearly documented. They were not seized alongside the Templar commanderies on land. Some historians have noted this absence and suggested that the fleet may have departed before dawn, possibly carrying assets that the order's leadership had quietly moved in the days or weeks before the arrests. It is a theory that fits the timeline, but it is only a theory. No surviving record describes a fleet being loaded with treasure, and no account of where such a fleet might have sailed has ever been confirmed. Treat this one as a plausible hypothesis, not a proven fact. Theory 2 is considerably less dramatic, and for that reason it may be the most credible. When Pope Clement V formally dissolved the Knights Templar at the Council of Vienne in 1312, he ordered that the bulk of Templar property be transferred to another military order, the Knights Hospitaller. Some historians argue that what looks like missing wealth was never truly missing at all. It passed through legal channels, absorbed into another institution, dispersed among creditors, or seized outright by monarchs who simply chose not to account for it transparently. The paperwork was imperfect, medieval record-keeping was incomplete, and the incentive to document a full and honest inventory was, frankly, low for everyone involved. This explanation lacks the drama of a midnight fleet departure, but it has more evidentiary support than any of the alternatives. Then there is the speculation, and here we need to be clear that we have moved away from historical evidence entirely. Over the centuries, various locations have been proposed as hiding places for Templar treasure. Gisor's castle in Normandy is one that attracted serious attention. Excavations there in the 20th century did uncover medieval tunnels beneath the site. No treasure was found. Sites in Portugal have also been suggested, given that the Templars had a significant presence in the Iberian Peninsula and the Portuguese branch of the order survived the dissolution under a different name. These are interesting threads, but they remain speculation without confirmed archaeological evidence. And then there are the legends, stories that historians generally regard as having no credible medieval foundation whatsoever, even if they have proven irresistible to popular culture. The connection between the Templars and Oak Island in Nova Scotia surfaces repeatedly in documentary series and enthusiast communities. Historians find no credible evidence linking the medieval order to that location. Similarly, Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland has been woven into Templar mythology through novels and films. Scholars caution that the chapel's actual historical connections to the Templars are far thinner than popular accounts suggest, and the claim that the Templars possessed sacred relics, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, belongs firmly to the realm of legend and later fictional tradition, with no historical documentation to support it. The honest answer, the one that most academic historians would offer, is that the Templar fortune was probably dispersed through a combination of mundane forces, legal transfers, royal seizures, outstanding debts, and possibly some pre-arrest movement of assets by an order that could read the political weather. The evidence confidence on this question is genuinely low. The mystery is real, and the fact that we are still asking it 7 centuries later tells us something important about how carefully the Templars guarded their affairs and about how much of the medieval world simply did not survive in writing. Even the most grounded explanation leaves gaps, and those gaps are precisely what has kept this mystery alive. 7 centuries have passed since Jacques de Molay was led to the stake on an island in the Seine. The order he led had been dissolved, its members scattered or imprisoned, its vaults reportedly stripped bare, and yet the questions that surrounded the Knights Templar in their final hours have never fully gone away. That persistence is not an accident, it is, in many ways, the Templars' most lasting achievement. Set aside the legends for a moment and consider what the historical record actually confirms. The Templars helped develop financial instruments that European commerce would build upon for generations. Letters of credit, managed accounts, cross-border asset transfer. These were not ideas that appeared from nowhere after the Templars were gone. Historians who study medieval finance generally recognize that the Templars contributed to laying groundwork that later banking institutions would refine and expand. That is a careful and accurate way to put it. They did not invent modern banking, but they demonstrated at a continental scale that trust and institutional infrastructure could move wealth across borders more efficiently than any armed escort ever could. There is a deep irony at the heart of that legacy. The Templars took a vow of personal poverty. Individual members were not permitted to accumulate wealth for themselves, and yet the institution they served became one of the richest organizations in medieval Europe. That contradiction, faith and poverty on one hand, financial sophistication and immense institutional power on the other, almost certainly made them enemies. When King Philip IV needed a reason to move against them, the wealth was both the motive and the justification. As for the missing fortune, the honest answer is that we do not know. The most grounded explanation, that Templar assets were dispersed through legal transfers, royal seizure, and pre-existing debts, is also the least dramatic. It may well be the correct one, but the gaps in the record are real, and those gaps are precisely what has kept the mystery alive. The Templars, it seems, were as skilled at concealing information as they were at managing money. Whether that concealment was deliberate in their final days or simply the result of records being lost to time is something no historian can say with certainty. What we can say is this: the Templars built something extraordinary, lost it in a single catastrophic night, left behind a silence that imagination has been filling ever since. If you have a theory about where the treasure went, leave it in the comments. We read them all. And if you want to explore more stories of medieval power networks whose consequences are still being argued over today, the next episode in Empire Secrets is already waiting for you. Subscribe so you do not miss it.